Caitlin Clark didn't trend because she dropped 40. She didn't trend because she hit a logo 3 with a hand in her face. She didn't trend because of a rivalry, a trade, or anything that even touched a basketball court. She trended because of one tap on her phone. And that sounds ridiculous, until you realize what that tap was attached to. Because this wasn't some random celebrity post or harmless clip floating through the timeline. This was the most divisive halftime show people claim they've seen in years. The kind of performance that doesn't just get reviewed like music, it gets judged like a political vote. The kind where the wrong reaction can turn you into a headline overnight. The kind where even staying quiet gets you dragged, because silence gets treated like a statement too. And Caitlin Clark? She's the last athlete anyone expected to step into that chaos. This is the same Caitlin who built her entire image on doing the one thing everyone says athletes should do: shut up and hoop. She smiles, answers politely, keeps it moving, and lets the highlights do the talking. She doesn't hand the internet extra material. She doesn't feed the outrage machine. She doesn't give people ammunition. Until now. Because after that halftime show, at the exact moment the internet was in full meltdown mode, Caitlin did something so small it should have meant nothing. And somehow, it became everything. People screenshot it. They circled it. They reposted it like it was a confession. Sports accounts treated it like breaking news. Culture war pages treated it like proof. Commentators treated it like a side had been chosen. Fans treated it like betrayal. Other fans treated it like freedom. And the wildest part? Caitlin didn't even say a word. No interview. No tweet. No press conference quote. Just one tiny action that instantly got read a million different ways. So the real question isn't what did Caitlin do? The real question is, why did it hit like a bomb? Why did a woman famous for basketball suddenly get dragged into a national culture war over a halftime show? Why did one click turn into a loyalty test? Why did people start talking about her like she'd crossed some invisible line? And even more importantly, why did this happen right now? At the exact moment the WNBA is trying to grow faster than it ever has. When Caitlin's brand is more valuable than ever. When sponsors, executives, media outlets, and fans all have opinions about who she's supposed to be. Because once you see the full setup, you realize this wasn't random. It was a collision. A collision between sports fame and pop culture. Between branding and authenticity. Between a superstar carefully kept inside a box, and a world constantly pushing her closer to the edge of it. And what happened next is what truly changed the story. Because the like wasn't even the most shocking part. That came after. But first, you have to understand the environment Caitlin stepped into. Because the timing of this moment is exactly why it exploded the way it did. To get that, we need to rewind to the night the halftime show happened. When nobody was even talking about the game anymore, and the internet was already divided before the first beat dropped. Because once you understand that chaos, you'll understand why Caitlin's smallest move became her loudest moment. Here's what people forget about the Super Bowl. It's not just football. It's a national cultural battlefield. The commercials get judged like movie trailers. The halftime show gets treated like a cultural scoreboard. And the next morning, half the country debates what it meant more than what it sounded like. So when that halftime show hit, it didn't land in a calm world. It landed in a world already wired for outrage. A world where performances aren't just good or bad, they are political. Where reactions aren't opinions, they are declarations. Where everything becomes identity, symbolism, and sides. That's why this show didn't just get discussed. It got fought over. If you watched the internet that night, you could feel it instantly. The arguments weren't even about the music half the time. They were about culture, language, identity, who the show was for, who it excluded, what it represented, and what it supposedly said about America. The performance became a mirror. And people don't like mirrors if they don't like what they see. That's why reactions were explosive before the stage lights even came on. People were pre-mad, pre-offended, pre-excited, pre-celebrating. Because the performer wasn't just an entertainer. Bad Bunny isn't background noise. He's a cultural force. A symbol. A walking headline. A lightning rod. And when you put that kind of energy onto the biggest stage in America, the reaction is guaranteed to be nuclear. So when the show ended and the internet erupted, every celebrity, every athlete, every influencer suddenly became part of a loyalty test. And Caitlin Clark, the most visible face in women's basketball, unknowingly walked straight into it. With one single tap. He's global. He's polarizing. And more importantly, he represents a shift whether you personally like his music or not. Because he's proof that mainstream America no longer gets to decide what mainstream is. And that reality unsettles people. For decades, the Super Bowl halftime show followed a familiar formula. Big. Safe. Comfortable. Even when it pushed boundaries, it did so carefully, packaged in a way that made everyone feel included. It was designed to be cultural comfort food. But this time felt different from the jump. It didn't feel like the performer was trying to please everybody. It felt like he was bringing his world to the stage, and daring the audience to meet him there. And whether you loved that or hated it, that's the exact recipe for national chaos. So on Super Bowl night, two realities were happening at once. Reality 1. Regular people on couches, eating wings, laughing, enjoying a show, and moving on. Reality 2. The internet, which no longer knows how to move on, treating the halftime show like a referendum on culture. That's where the war started. Because the second the performance kicked off, reactions split into camps. One side. This is electric. This is fresh. This is culture. This is celebration. The other side. This is not what the Super Bowl should be. This feels like a statement. And the thing about statements? People assume they're aimed at them. So the hot takes flooded in. Clips chopped into the most provocative 10 seconds possible. Captions engineered to bait the other side. Comment sections filled with people who didn't even watch the performance, they just wanted to fight about it. And once that happens, the truth becomes irrelevant. Because truth is slow. But narrative is fast. And the narrative that night was brutally simple. If you loved it, you stood for this. If you hated it, you stood for that. No nuance. No middle ground. No, I liked parts of it. No, it's not that deep. Just sides. And the show itself poured gasoline on that fire. The language. The visuals. The vibe. The confidence. It didn't whisper. It didn't apologize. It didn't slow down to make sure everyone felt comfortable. It moved like it knew exactly what it was, and didn't care who disapproved. For some viewers, that confidence made it incredible. For others, that confidence felt like confrontation. And that's why the celebrity cameos mattered so much. Because once famous faces appear on that stage, the performance stops being about music and becomes about alignment. People start treating the camera like a guest list. Who's standing with who? Who belongs to which tribe? Who's on which side? By the time the show ended, the actual football game barely mattered anymore. The halftime show became the headline. The debate. The argument. The thing people were still screaming about the next morning. And here's the part that matters most. When the internet gets into that kind of mood, it starts hunting for proof. Proof that celebrities agree. Proof that athletes chose sides. Proof that public figures stood up or sold out. People stop watching the performance and start watching the reactions to the performance. They track likes. They track follows. They track reposts. Because a like is the perfect weapon. It's small enough to deny, but public enough for everyone to project meaning onto. That's why moments like this become traps for famous people, especially athletes. Because athletes live under a strange set of expectations. Fans want them to be superhuman on the court, but silent off it. They want them to have massive platforms, but only use them in ways that never make anyone uncomfortable. They want authenticity, but only the version that sells. And that brings us to Caitlin Clark. Because Caitlin isn't just an athlete. She's the athlete in women's basketball right now. She's the engine. She's the ratings magnet. She's the jersey mover. She's the face on the posters. She's the name everyone argues about even when she isn't playing. Which means people don't view her like a normal person casually reacting to music. They view her like a symbol. And symbols aren't allowed to be messy. So once the halftime show turned into a cultural battlefield, the stage was set. The internet was already angry, already divided, already searching for its next target. And Caitlin Clark was sitting right there, the most visible athlete in the space. Which meant this wasn't just a halftime show happened. It was a moment where everyone was watching to see who would support it, who would criticize it, who would stay silent, who would pretend they didn't see it. And Caitlin's entire public image was built on one thing: she doesn't flinch. But the way she didn't flinch this time. That's what changed everything. Because when a country is split, the internet doesn't want you to be human. It wants you to be a sign. And Caitlin Clark, whether she meant to or not, stepped right into the center of that storm with one quiet move that people treated like a megaphone. No speech. No interview. No tweet. Just the way normal people react every day without thinking. And that's exactly why it was so dangerous. Because the next morning, when ESPN posted a simple recap carousel, nothing dramatic, just celebrity cameos, the comment section was already radioactive. Half the people celebrating, half tearing it apart. Culture arguments, political arguments, identity arguments, a digital battlefield. And in the middle of that chaos, Caitlin Clark liked the post. That's it. One tap. No caption. No explanation. No commentary. Just engagement. Normally, nobody would care. But context changes everything. This wasn't a random highlight clip. This was the most controversial performance of the year, sitting inside the most toxic comment section of the week. And Caitlin, the most commercially valuable player in women's basketball, just walked straight into it. Here's why that mattered. Up until that moment, Caitlin had been almost surgically careful with her public behavior. She doesn't casually interact with controversial content. She doesn't toss likes around when the temperature is high. Her interviews are polished. Her social media is clean. Her brand feels intentional. Nothing reckless. Nothing impulsive. Nothing that could be twisted. So when she engaged with that post, at that moment, people noticed instantly. Because when a superstar breaks pattern, even slightly, the internet zooms in. Screenshots started circulating within minutes. Someone checked the likes, saw her name, snapped it, circled it, posted it. Caitlin Clark liked this. And suddenly, that one tiny tap wasn't just a tap anymore. It became evidence. Proof. A signal. A stance. And once the internet decides something is a statement, there's no going back. No context, only implication. And implication is the internet's favorite sport, because it allows everyone to project their own interpretation onto the same moment. If you already loved the halftime show, the like meant she supported it. If you already hated it, the like meant she endorsed everything you opposed. If you were neutral, that single tap suddenly forced you to question whether neutrality was even possible. And here's the part people underestimated. Caitlin isn't just popular, she's symbolic. Over the past year, she's been pulled into debates that had nothing to do with basketball. People argued about her media coverage. They debated whether she was overrated or underappreciated. Some groups embraced her as proof of their narrative, while others pushed back and framed her as the symbol of something else entirely. Whether she wanted it or not, Caitlin became a cultural Rorschach test. People saw what they wanted to see in her. So when she liked that post, it wasn't treated as Caitlin enjoying a recap. It was treated as Caitlin choosing a side. And that's when everything exploded. The backlash didn't just come from random trolls. It came from people who felt they had defended her before, people who had gone to war online in her name, people who believed she represented something specific. And now, in their eyes, she had stepped outside that box. The comments poured in, accusations, disappointment, emotional reactions. I thought she was different. I guess we know where she stands now. So much for staying out of politics. Dramatic language. Massive overreactions. Emotional takes that treated an Instagram like as if it were a campaign speech. At the same time, on the opposite side, there was celebration. Fans who had always argued that Caitlyn shouldn't be used as a political pawn applauded her. They framed the like as freedom, as normal human behavior, as proof she's just someone in her 20s enjoying music without asking permission. Two completely different realities formed around the exact same 2-second action. And the most intense part? Caitlyn said nothing. She didn't explain. She didn't clarify. She didn't delete it. The like stayed, and that made it louder. Because in the world of public figures, silence is rarely neutral. Delete it fast, and people assume it was a mistake. Leave it up, and people assume it was intentional. And Caitlyn left it up. Now think about the pressure that creates. Every endorsement deal she holds is built on stability. Nike, Gatorade, national campaigns, brands that avoid chaos, brands that want broad appeal, brands that want their superstar selling products, not fueling headlines. Suddenly, headlines were forming around a single like. Sports talk shows picked it up. Massive social accounts framed it as Caitlyn entering the debate. Podcasts speculated whether this signaled a shift in how she would operate publicly going forward. And that's when the real tension surfaced. Because this was no longer about music. It became about whether Caitlyn Clark, the face of the WNBA's explosive growth, was allowed to publicly react to something the internet was fighting over. Was she allowed to be a person? Or was she required to stay neutral at all costs? That's where the story gets deeper. Caitlyn sits in a uniquely complicated position. She has fans across political lines. Critics across political lines. Supporters who want her silent. Others who want her outspoken. Teammates from diverse backgrounds. A league historically tied to social issues. Sponsors demanding minimal controversy. Fans demanding authenticity. It's a balancing act that would exhaust anyone. And in that moment, the internet demanded she declare which tightrope she was walking. All because she liked a recap post. But here's what most people missed. The post she liked didn't just celebrate the performance, it highlighted celebrities who showed up in support. That meant her like wasn't just interpreted as enjoying music. It was interpreted as aligning with the entire energy surrounding the show. That's when the narrative machine really started spinning. Some accounts framed it as her picking a side. Others framed it as her breaking her silence. Some exaggerated it into something far bigger than it ever was. And the longer it trended, the more pressure built. The question shifted from why did she like it, to will she address it? Most public figures follow a predictable script. They quietly unlike the post. Their team releases a vague statement about context. Then they move on and hope the news cycle resets. Caitlyn didn't do that. She didn't unlike it. She didn't clarify. She didn't pretend it didn't happen. And that only made the debate louder, because now it wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice. Whether she intended it or not, it forced a bigger conversation about how much freedom female athletes are allowed to have. Male athletes like controversial content constantly. They speak openly. They take positions. They are often given space to be complex. But female athletes? Every move is magnified. Every reaction dissected. Every silence analyzed. Caitlyn exists at the crossroads of sports, culture, and the rapid rise of women's basketball. The spotlight on her burns hotter than almost anyone else in the league. So when she liked that post, it became a referendum. And then came the moment that changed everything. 2 days later, she didn't just like something, she commented. If the like was the spark, the comment was gasoline. 2 days after the internet dissected her tap like a political speech, Caitlyn went back online and left 3 words and a heart emoji. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't PR crafted. It was simple. Supportive. But in that moment, it landed like thunder. The post came from a fellow WNBA player, a Latina teammate, sharing her emotional reaction to the halftime show. She wrote about pride, about seeing her culture on a global stage, about growing up bilingual, and about finally feeling seen. It was vulnerable, honest, human. And Caitlyn responded with 3 words and a heart. The word everyone fixated on was proud. Proud of what? The performance? The cultural moment? Her teammates' vulnerability? People filled in the blanks instantly. And the narrative fractured even harder. Critics said this confirmed everything. That the silence wasn't neutral, that the like wasn't accidental, that Caitlyn had crossed a line and doubled down. Supporters said she was simply backing her teammate, and that supporting someone's story shouldn't be controversial. But here's what made this different. She commented after the backlash went viral. After the outrage. After the think pieces. After the angry threads. She knew the temperature, and she commented anyway. That's what shifted the energy from, did she mean it? To she absolutely meant it. And then something unexpected happened. WNBA players started responding. Some reposted the interaction. Some liked her comment. Others added supportive messages. Veterans who had previously kept their distance publicly engaged. And that wasn't a small thing, because ever since Caitlyn entered the league, WNBA locker room dynamics have been under a microscope. Every interaction gets analyzed. Every move becomes a story. Every on-court moment gets magnified. People constantly speculate about tension, jealousy, and favoritism, whether it's real or imagined. And in this moment, there was visible solidarity. That surprised people because the narrative online often painted Caitlyn as separate, orbiting her own world, with a fan base that didn't always align with the league's historical culture. But here she was, publicly supporting a teammate's expression of identity. And whether you think that's huge or not, in the context of women's basketball, it mattered. It shifted perception. It complicated the simplified narratives built around her. It forced critics to rethink their framing. Now, this wasn't just about a halftime show. It was about locker room dynamics, teammate loyalty, cultural respect, and whether Caitlyn Clark, the most scrutinized player in the league, aligned with the people she shares the court with. That's when the backlash machine tried to spin harder. Once the comment went viral, it wasn't just sports accounts covering it. Culture pages, political commentators, and influencers who thrive on framing everything as tribal warfare, all jumped in. Their question grew sharper. Is Caitlyn Clark choosing the league over her fan base? As if supporting a teammate and enjoying music meant abandoning millions of people. But the loudest takes rarely tell the full story. Behind the noise, something quieter was happening. Engagement numbers spiked. Her follower count climbed. The conversation moved beyond outrage into curiosity. People who had never paid attention to women's basketball were now watching. People who had only seen her as a highlight machine were now talking about her as a personality. Brands started paying closer attention. Controversy scares corporations, but attention excites them. The fear isn't backlash, it's irrelevance. And Caitlyn was anything but irrelevant. She proved she could withstand noise without folding. She didn't apologize. She didn't clarify. She didn't soften her words. She didn't retreat into corporate safe language. The comment stayed. The world kept spinning. Here's the fascinating layer. The comment wasn't political. It wasn't a policy statement. It wasn't aggressive. It was about pride and support, which forced a hard question. When did celebrating someone's culture automatically become political? That's what made the debate messy. If critics argued she crossed a political line, they also had to argue that basic human pride is political, not an easy position to defend. This is why the moment didn't implode. It simmered. It lingered. And instead of damaging her brand, it revealed something new. Caitlyn isn't reckless, but she isn't robotic either. Calculated on the court, yes. But off the court, she was starting to show flashes of independence. That's what made people nervous. The most marketable superstar is predictable. The most powerful superstar isn't fully controllable. And the bigger question began forming. Was this the start of a new Caitlyn Clark? Not louder. Not political. Just less boxed in. Because once you step outside the carefully constructed image, even once, and survive it, you stop fearing it. But the story wasn't done escalating. While the internet debated her comment, something happened behind the scenes that few noticed. Something involving the artist at the center of the halftime storm. If rumors are even partially true, this wasn't just a social media moment. It was the beginning of a cultural crossover nobody expected. And that possibility made the league, sponsors, and the entire sports world lean forward. A few days after the comment went viral, whispers began moving through sports and entertainment circles. Not headlines. Not official statements. Quiet communication between camps. According to multiple media insiders, there was contact. A message of appreciation, a thank you, and an acknowledgement that Caitlyn's support didn't go unnoticed. When you really sit with that, it changes everything. This wasn't just Caitlyn liking a post anymore. This was potentially the biggest name in women's basketball connecting, even indirectly, with one of the world's biggest music stars. Not small. Not local. Not contained. Culture colliding with culture. The WNBA has fought for mainstream respect for decades. Attention, airtime, investment, and a place in the larger entertainment ecosystem. And suddenly, its biggest star was organically linked to one of the most globally dominant artists alive. Even if it was just a message, even if it was just gratitude, the symbolism, the deeper layer. Caitlyn didn't manufacture this moment. She didn't announce a collaboration. She didn't tease anything. She reacted like a person, and the world built the spotlight around her. Authenticity lands differently than strategy. Scripted moves feel forced. Spontaneous moments feel real. And whether people loved or hated it, it felt real. Zooming out, Caitlyn Clark sits at the center of the WNBA's fastest growth period in history. Ratings are up. Attendance is up. Merchandise is flying. Sponsors are investing. Expansion talks are heating up. The league wants mainstream relevance like never before. But going mainstream isn't controlled, it's messy. It means cross-cultural moments. It means your biggest star interacts with music, fashion, politics, identity, and global influence. That's what the NBA and NFL figured out decades ago. The WNBA is stepping into it now. Caitlyn's interaction with this halftime moment felt like a preview of that future, forcing the league and fans to confront something uncomfortable. If you want your superstar globally relevant, you can't demand silence every time culture moves. And here's what makes it even more interesting. As online arguments cooled, something unexpected happened in the women's basketball community. Instead of division growing, signs of unity emerged. Players who had previously kept a public distance from Caitlyn began interacting more openly online. Support became visible. Moments that would have been scrutinized before now felt lighter. Stepping into controversy humanized her in the eyes of those who had only seen her as a media phenomenon. That might be the most important outcome. One of the loudest criticisms Caitlyn has faced is that she's treated differently, elevated differently, and positioned differently, none of which was her doing. This moment shifted perception. It showed she wasn't operating above the league. She was inside it, supporting teammates, standing in solidarity, and not hiding when things got loud. That matters more than any like. And it brings us to the most pivotal moment in the saga. Eventually, the press had to ask her about it. You can only trend for so long before someone puts a microphone in your face. And when that moment came, people expected one of two things: a carefully crafted PR answer or a nervous retreat. What they got instead completely reframed the conversation. The way she handled it might be the clearest sign, yet, that Caitlyn Clark isn't interested in being anyone's symbol. She's interested in being herself. Let's talk about that press conference, because that's where this story stopped being about Instagram and became about identity. 5 days after the Super Bowl, 5 days after the like, and 3 days after the comment, the story had mutated. It wasn't just an Instagram moment anymore. It was a debate about culture, athlete responsibility, branding, and what Caitlyn Clark was supposed to represent. When she stepped into that pre-season press conference, the room felt different. This wasn't the usual collection of local beat writers asking about training camp adjustments or off-season workouts. National outlets were there. Cameras that don't normally show up for early WNBA media days were set up in the back. Everyone knew the question was coming. You could almost feel it hovering. Here's the thing about Caitlin Clark that people underestimate. She doesn't panic in high-pressure rooms. She's built for them. We've seen it on the court. Tie game, crowd screaming in her face. She doesn't rush. She doesn't flinch. That same calm showed up at the podium. The question came exactly as expected. Caitlin, your reaction to the halftime show went viral. There's been a lot of debate about what it meant. Do you want to clarify anything? Most public figures would pull out the script here. They'd soften, hedge, offer vague statements about respecting all viewpoints. Wrap it in corporate-safe language. Move on. Caitlin didn't do that. She didn't over-explain. She didn't apologize. She didn't dramatize it. She said she watched the performance. She said it was incredible. She said she liked the post because she liked what she saw. She said she commented because she was proud of her teammate for sharing something personal. And then she said something that cut through the entire storm. She would not apologize for enjoying music. She would not apologize for supporting her teammates. Appreciating someone's culture isn't political. It's human. That line hit because it reframed everything. The narrative had been built around politics, sides, and symbolism. She pulled it back to humanity, calmly, steadily, without aggression or defensiveness. Then she added something subtle but powerful. If me liking an Instagram post is the most controversial thing happening in women's basketball right now, we're probably in a good place. It wasn't combative. It wasn't sarcastic. It was perspective. And perspective is hard to argue with, because she wasn't attacking anyone. She wasn't mocking critics. She wasn't dismissing fans. She was just reminding everyone how small the original action actually was. A like. A comment. Support for a teammate. That's it. In that moment, the energy in the room shifted. Tension eased. Reporters who had prepared for damage control got authenticity instead. And authenticity disarms people. It doesn't create a villain. It doesn't give scandal to escalate. It just sits there, steady. Here's what made the moment even more important. She didn't distance herself from the league. She spoke as a person inside it, as someone who respects her teammates, as someone who exists in a diverse locker room. For months, narratives had positioned her as separate, orbiting around the WNBA instead of being part of it. That press conference quietly crushed that idea. She didn't isolate herself. She integrated herself. And the applause at the end? Not about politics. About clarity. About calm. About someone refusing to be boxed into an extreme narrative. Here's the part that made sponsors exhale. The response wasn't reckless. It wasn't confrontational. It didn't alienate. It humanized. That's the sweet spot brands dream of. Controversy that ends in maturity doesn't damage equity. It builds it. When the clip circulated online, the tone shifted again. The loudest critics had less to work with. You can argue against a like. You can twist a screenshot. But it's much harder to attack someone calmly saying, "I'm allowed to enjoy something and support my teammate." That's reasonable. And reasonable doesn't trend as aggressively as outrage. But there's another layer. This wasn't just surviving backlash. This was evolution. Caitlin Clark publicly stood in the middle of a cultural debate and didn't retreat. She didn't escalate, but she didn't shrink either. That's new. That's different from the hyper-scrolled version people were used to. When a superstar shows they can handle heat without folding, they unlock a new level of power. Critics know she won't crumble under pressure. Fans know she won't disappear when things get uncomfortable. The league knows she can carry more than scoring titles. She can carry narrative weight. And narrative weight is what separates stars from icons. The twist no one saw coming. Instead of hurting her popularity, it amplified it. Search trends climbed. Engagement climbed. Media appearances increased. Suddenly, Caitlin Clark wasn't just the face of highlight reels. She was the face of composure, of balance, of being young and famous and still grounded enough to say, "This isn't that deep." A bigger realization started forming. Maybe the real story wasn't that Caitlin stepped into controversy. Maybe the real story is that she stepped into adulthood as a public figure. Up until now, much of the conversation had been about how she was treated, how the media covered her, how the league responded, and how fans reacted. This was different. This was her choosing how to respond, on her terms, without a meltdown, without a PR cleanup tour, without backing down. This wasn't just a halftime show moment. It was a turning point. A quiet one, but real. The Caitlin Clark who left that press conference felt slightly different from the one who entered. Not louder, not political, just more solid. More comfortable in her own skin. More aware that she can't control how people interpret her, but she can control how she shows up. And that's powerful. Here's the lingering question. If a simple act of support created this much noise, what happens the next time something bigger hits? Now everyone knows she won't automatically retreat. She won't panic. She can stand in a storm and keep her footing. And storms are part of fame, especially when you're the fastest rising star in a league trying to redefine its place in American culture. The biggest takeaway: this wasn't about music. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about sides. It was about control. And who gets to define Caitlin Clark's identity moving forward? The internet tried. Commentators tried. The outrage machine tried. But at that podium, she defined it herself. And that might be the most important development of her career so far. The next era of women's basketball isn't just about scoring records. It's about navigating visibility. And after this moment, Caitlin Clark looks ready for that spotlight in a way people hadn't fully seen before. The real question now: will the league let her stay human, or will the pressure to be a symbol return even stronger next time? Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wanted to admit. Caitlin Clark was always going to have this moment. Maybe not over a halftime show. Maybe not over an Instagram like. But she was ready when it arrived. At some point, the fastest rising star in women's basketball was going to step outside the invisible box people had built around her. And that box was real. Polished. Safe. Commercially optimized. The version of Caitlin who scores 35 smiles in press conferences, thanks her teammates, and never says anything that makes sponsors nervous. The version that lets completely different audiences project their beliefs onto her without friction. For a while, that worked. Her highlights were louder than any cultural noise. Her stats drowned out every debate. Her silence allowed people to assume she quietly agreed with them. But projection only works until the first crack appears. The halftime moment was that crack. Suddenly, the illusion that Caitlin belongs to everyone was tested. Fans realized she doesn't automatically mirror their worldview. Critics realized she isn't a media-manufactured mascot either. Brands realized she's more human than robotic. And that matters long-term. The WNBA is scaling faster than ever. More broadcast deals, expansion talks, corporate investment, and mainstream visibility. But mainstream visibility is messy. When you reach that level of relevance, you can't exist in a perfectly controlled bubble. You intersect with music, culture, identity, and politics, whether you ask to or not. Caitlin sits at the center of that intersection. This wasn't about a halftime show. It was about ownership. Who defines her? Who claims her? Who decides when she's crossed a line? Over the past year, different groups tried to shape her into different things. A pure hooper, a symbol of something bigger, a business engine, and a lightning rod. But this saga revealed something uncomfortable. She doesn't fully belong to any of those narratives. She belongs to herself. And that's rarer than it seems for someone at her level. She didn't shout it. She didn't campaign. She didn't make a speech about autonomy. She just refused to treat normal human behavior like a scandal. And the world didn't collapse. That's the shift nobody's talking about. The loudest part of the storm wasn't the most important part. The trending posts, the outrage threads, the think pieces, gone. But the ripple effects? They are still moving. Before this, the dominant narrative was simple. Generational scorer, ratings magnet, commercial juggernaut. After this, the vocabulary changed. Composed, self-assured, independent, grounded under pressure. That's a different category of star. Athletic dominance spikes. Presence stabilizes. Presence lasts. Within a single week, Caitlyn went from silent engagement to viral backlash to doubling down with support to calmly addressing it under national media pressure. No spiral. No apology tour. No frantic PR cleanup. Just steady. That steadiness recalibrates everything. The media knows she won't panic, sponsors know she won't crumble, teammates know she won't disappear, and fans know she's not a projection screen. That changes leverage. Leverage is everything. Once a league's biggest star proves she can survive turbulence, she becomes more central to its identity. Not just as a scorer, but as a stabilizer. That's evolution. And the double standard is impossible to ignore. If a male superstar liked a controversial halftime recap post, would it trend for 5 days? Trigger debates about betrayal, loyalty, and choosing sides? Probably not. But when a woman at the top of her sport does it, it becomes a litmus test. Caitlyn handled it gracefully, and in doing so, quietly shifted expectations for others. Now there's precedent. You can be human and commercially dominant at the same time. Authenticity doesn't automatically destroy brand equity. You don't have to hollow yourself out to succeed. You can stand in a storm and not blink. That's powerful, especially for the next generation watching. The ceiling just moved. And here's the headline nobody wrote. Caitlyn Clark's ceiling just got higher. Ceilings exist not just in arenas, but in perception. Some people quietly believed her influence depended on staying neutral, inside a controlled environment. That theory cracked. Her popularity didn't dip. Engagement climbed. Relevance expanded beyond sports. That's not fragility, that's gravity. Gravity pulls opportunities toward you. When you don't get crushed by pressure, you grow into it. This won't be the biggest controversy she'll face. It was the smallest one she needed. Surviving a minor cultural storm builds psychological armor. Before it happens, fear. What if it ruins everything? After it happens, the fear shrinks. Caitlyn now knows she can withstand a viral cycle without losing control. Next time, she won't operate from anxiety. She'll operate from experience. Experience creates authority. This was a coming-of-age moment. Strip it down. Likes, backlash, headlines, gone. This wasn't drama. It was maturation. A superstar realizing she doesn't need permission to exist as a full human being in public. And once that clicks, everything changes. The next chapter of Caitlyn Clark's career won't just be about scoring titles. It will be about influence. Navigating culture. Balancing being the face of a league with being herself. She didn't become a political activist. She didn't pivot her brand. She simply refused to shrink, and the world adjusted. That's power. The WNBA is entering its most pivotal era. Expansion, revenue debates, collective bargaining, and global growth. Caitlyn will be at the center, not just as a scorer, but as a presence. The halftime saga was the first stress test of her autonomy. She passed calmly, confidently, without theatrics. Now everyone knows something crucial. She won't automatically retreat when culture gets loud. That makes her harder to box in. It makes her more essential to the league's future. Zoom out. This wasn't about music, politics, or sides. It was about identity control. The internet tried. Commentators tried. Outrage tried. She defined herself quietly. And once that line is drawn, it doesn't disappear. This wasn't the climax of her career. It was the foundation for the next level. The next storm will come, it always does. But after this, Caitlyn Clark doesn't look like a phenomenon anymore. She looks like an institution.